Hello everyone. So I've been working on a video talking about the Valkyria Chronicles collab for a bit, but since a new patch just came out on a global server, let's just review it real quick. It hasn't really been that long since I last talked about Michelle and Gustav, as well as Lisa. So I think even more than usual, I don't need to be too detailed because I don't think much has actually changed about these units since they were first released on the Chinese server. So let's just go straight into it. So Lisa is the new SR freebie. She does have a very unique playstyle, but like many other SRs, she's kind of stuck in that weird limbo between being useful and not useful. Her talent immediately makes her kind of a niche pick, even in PvE, because she requires certain terrain in order to function properly. Or at least that's how she gets her attack bonus. I mean, you can still deploy her without the attack bonus, but obviously she won't be as good. So she is a DPS support hybrid, and she is most notable for being the first direct healer for Meteor Strike faction, as I've mentioned in the past. Now, for players who play a lot of Meteor Strike in their PvP box, I don't think Lisa is going to be changing her box around or anything like that, because her range is like maybe slightly above average at best. Her damage output is kind of middling, and she's not particularly tanky either, even though she can switch forms to kind of be able to do each of these things slightly better. She might be useful in some Meteor Strike challenges, and she might be useful as another member of Protagonists, which of course has a very strong freebie buff in Matthew, but of course you don't get her until you get into the part 3 of the story, which is not only tailored towards level 70 players, but also is like probably like 100 plus maps into the story. By then it's likely you will have a strong set of SSR characters, even if you're new to the game. But that being said, she is going to be a character they are going to release more shards for as rewards from the story over time. So she is going to be a free 6-star character eventually, and given her unique role as a Meteor Strike healer, I do think she's kind of cool to level up as a side project, even if you already have a lot of other units leveled up. You never know when she might come in handy. And like I mentioned in the past, if you are in a rush to build her, you really like her character or you like her design or something, for once they actually included Gate of Fates for this character, so you can build her up and you don't have to wait an entire year or whatever until they release all the shards necessary to freely shard her to 6 stars. Now I do spend a lot of time talking about her as if she's just a pure healer or something, and she really isn't. I've mentioned this already, but she only has 2 heal spells. She really has a basic single target heal, which is the Mariel 1C heal, and her 3C acts basically as a mass heal when she's in her healer form. When she is in any other form, she is a DPS. And in this game, that sort of flexibility isn't necessarily that useful, especially for as late into the game as you will be getting Lisa. You probably already have lots and lots of characters to choose from, so a character who can shift easily between multiple different roles isn't necessarily all that useful unless they're doing all of them at the same time. Now, to be fair, she can sort of do that. If you put her in her healer form, she can still do damage. She can still use her assassin skills, because her attack bonus from her talent is not reliant on being in one of her DPS forms, so she's still going to have that attack bonus as long as you have her on the right terrain. Nevertheless, there's really not a whole lot to say about her. She is basically barely passable in PvP right now, and she is interesting for PvE, and everybody's going to get her for free anyway, so like I said, probably a good side project to work on if you have the resources to do it. So now let's talk about the 2 flagship characters for this patch cycle, which is Michelle and Gustav. Michelle is a very tanky AoE character. Her kit is largely centered around line skills, and she also puts like some stacking debuffs that increase her damage taken and also deal fixed damage if she AoEs enough times. The most unique mechanic of Michelle that is worth talking about is her 1C substitute skill. I would say this is what truly differentiates her from other AoE characters. She is tanky, and she does have decent range, but those are traits shared by other AoE characters. Like for example, Arian Rod is fairly tanky, and she's also a Lancer. Lewin, of course, is quite tanky, and he is often played as a hybrid single-target AoE character. I guess you could say Reen is a tanky AoE character, although he has bad movement, which is probably his weakest point. So Michelle basically has moderate movement range, pretty good range because of how long line skills tend to be. And like I said, the most unique part is this substitute skill. Now at first glance, you might look at it and say, okay, it just looks like a standard Cold Blood style skill where you get to move an additional 2 blocks, and you can use it that way. But if you watch a number of games with Michelle, what you will end up noticing is that one of the unique things that she can really do is that she can place the substitute down and then run back away from the enemy team so that you can safely spam AoEs using the substitute that sort of extends her AoE range without placing down some kind of unit that your opponent can then take advantage of. So right now in the meta, there are a number of units that can either bounce off of units, or they can attack and then act again. For example, Sherry, Sherry's base movement is good but not great, but if you have someone out front that she can bounce off of, then her movement range is just really crazy. Wataru can hook onto both allies and enemies, which gives them a really high movement range. Wet Ham can drop his sword, which damages somebody, and then he can teleport to the damaged unit, and if he breezes, he also has really crazy movement range. So there's all kinds of units that can sort of bounce off of units that run to the front, and then that ends up exposing your back line, even though you only sent one unit forward. Michelle can avoid this because this substitute skill extends her AoE range, but the substitute itself is not a unit. Now the downside to this is that it can't really obstruct enemy units and then stop them from moving towards you, but it also makes it so that, like I said, they can't bounce off of this unit. You can't have Sherry, shadow rating it from a really far range and then bouncing that so that she can move all the way to her back line if she's lucky enough to get a breeze or something like that. And of course, Michelle being a Lancer class is pretty useful in the current meta. There really isn't that many infantries running around. There is, of course, Christiane as a tank, who is often run as an infantry. But as far as DPS go, you have quite a few Cavs running around. You have Elwyn, who's a Cav. You have Helena, who's a Cav. Emperor Lovina is a Cav. So there's just a lot of Cavs running around, and not that many infantry that will be able to punish, I almost said Suzette, Michelle. So overall, Michelle is pretty good. If you see her in a lot of replays, she is quite good. She does a lot of damage, she has good range, she's fairly tanky. Her factions are okay. Glory plus Tensei is a pretty good combination. It sucks that she doesn't have a third faction, but for the current meta, that is a pretty good combination. All that being said, Michelle is just another AoE character in addition to all the other AoE characters. She's definitely a threat to be looking out for, but not a must-pull in any way. Okay, next we have Gustav. I kind of criticized Gustav a lot in the last time I talked about her, and I might have made it sound like I think Gustav is really bad or something. I don't really believe that. I just feel like the main gimmick they gave her is really not that powerful, and it is usually relatively easy to play around. Now, just to review real quick, Gustav is all about countering clock and has a number of cooldown related abilities. First, anytime Gustav gets hit, she will cause a debuff that causes a random skill to have cooldown increased by 1. She has a 3C that's basically like a black hole, which also inflicts this when you end your turn, you have a random cooldown increased by 1. She has a heal spell, which makes it so that all your cooldowns are reduced by 1 in addition to healing you. And finally, she has an aura around her from her talent. Whenever you use a damaging skill, it reduces cooldown by 1. And finally, of course, she has the clock prevention after she uses her 3C, which is a buff on herself that causes enemy clock activations to not happen. So first, I feel the need to point out that Gustav's heal, in addition to her cooldown reduction aura, are actually very powerful, especially in PvE. Like, just imagine a PvE fight where you can just huddle people around Gustav and spam skills. It can actually be quite powerful, and you don't need to rely on things like Dimension Jewel as much if you have Gustav around. So I do think Gustav can be a pretty strong choice in Ancient Beckoning. Although at this point, the Ancient Beckoning fights are very competitive in terms of who you're going to take in there. If we're assuming every single unit is 6 stars and you have perfect account and stuff. But yeah, I don't think I need to explain too much about why a cooldown reducing aura is really strong for PvE purposes. It's a little bit harder to apply in PvP just because you're not going to huddle around one unit unless you are tank pushing, basically. And on that note, that is pretty much the main setting I would be using Gustav. We often see a lot of games where people lose because of clock, and that's because oftentimes it's the player playing a safe tank push game, and we see this sometimes with whales. Sometimes whales decide, I'm going to play a very safe tank push game because I have very high stats on my units. I have a number of healers in my box and I can pick them. I should be relatively safe. I'm playing the odds and hoping my opponent doesn't clock like 3 times in a row. And then we see their opponent clock 3 times in a row and they're very sad. And of course, Gustav can fit into a box like that. And if nothing else, she's definitely going to be someone that, you know, if you are relying on clock, you're going to be like, okay, I really need to ban Gustav. But the biggest problem with Gustav, in my opinion, is really just that she seems to be very, very restricted to mainly tank push strategies because her range is probably like slightly below average at best. She has the standard 3 move. She doesn't have an act again. She does have all skills, or all range plus 2, assuming you have any skills on cooldown for her, which is relatively easy to do because you could just bring her heal and then heal on the first turn and she'll have plus 2 range after that. So basically with her AoE she will have 8 range because she has 3 move, 3 range on the AoE itself, and then plus 2 from the passive on her 3C. And, you know, 8 range is not too bad. But compared to a lot of the craziest mages out there, you know, like Light of Genesis can teleport forward, Lucretia has her crazy doll that lets her do all kinds of shenanigans. Even someone like Kruger can use his shield to bump forward a little bit more, and even protect himself while he's at it. Basically what they seem to have done is they made Gustav slightly less mobile than a lot of these other mages, or slightly less range than all these other mages, in exchange for having her, giving her this very powerful anti-clock effect. But as I mentioned in the past, this anti-clock effect can only come into play once she uses her 3C. Now, of course, the other way of activating her cooldown punishment is to have her get hit. So, obviously, being a mage means that she probably should not be taking any kind of single target hits. She's probably going to die. You know, she's not particularly tanky, and she really doesn't have that many tanky soldier options. She has Crystal Warlocks, and I believe the other one was Dark Centurion. But anyway, as I was saying, she needs to get hit to activate the other way of her reducing or increasing enemies' cooldowns. Now, the main way I think this comes into play is if your opponent has some kind of unit that AoEs, and this is especially true if in when you're fighting against Waytam. Wet Ham has to drop his sword, which does an AoE, and then he has to teleport to the unit in front with the sword. So Gustav kind of disrupts that because when Waytam drops the sword, she might increase his teleport cooldown, in which case he won't be able to teleport. And that makes it a lot harder for Waytam to do his typical engagement, and she might also increase the AoE or the single target skill cooldown by 1, which sometimes does matter, especially if it's a clock Waytam, which is pretty common enchant to run on him. So you can see that Gustav does feel like he was mostly created to punish people who are spamming AoE against you, because Gustav really should not be taking single target hits, and she probably can't survive most assassins that well either. And that's really the ultimate problem with Gustav, is that she seemed to have been designed with a very specific type of match in mind, and she might be very good in those matches, but those kind of matches don't come up that often, or you just have to kind of hope that that's the kind of matchup you get. Like I mentioned earlier, we have seen games where Wales especially, they play very, very safe games where they have 4 healers and 2 tanks or whatever, and then they have Rosen plus Elma plus Liana plus a 4th healer like Sissy White or something. Just a very safe tanky box where they just force you into a tank push, and they probably have assassins in there. Gustav might be able to shine in that situation. And in fairness, if you just happen to get into a matchup against that sort of box while you're planning to play AoE especially, then you're going to be in a lot of trouble, because you're going to need to ban Rosen, you're going to need to ban Elma, and you probably want to ban Liana if you're really good. It's pretty unlikely you're going to get them all, and then that's on top of any threatening DPS you might want to get rid of. And then after that, you still have to ban Gustav. So I will say that I can see Gustav being a pick in some playoff situations. I don't think she's going to be that great in ladder play, unless you're just looking to play a very specific box constantly. But I can definitely see like a lot of whales bringing her out in a very specific situation, especially now that your side box can be so much larger. You can pretty much swap your team between a very aggressive box into a very tanky box if you really want to. So coming up on this weekend, we're going into the top 16 of the playoffs right now. I wouldn't be totally surprised if we actually saw 1 or 2 Gustavs appear from some of the whales. So let's see if that happens. For everyone else, if you are not a whale or if you're not super into PvP, you can get Gustav if you want to. I don't, even without her cooldown gimmicks, she's still a perfectly fine mage. And like I said, for PvE purposes, she can actually be quite good because a cooldown reduction aura is pretty strong. So yeah, that's pretty much all I have to say about Gustav. Okay, so one of the other expectations I have for this month is that we are going to be getting SP Dieharte. As I mentioned in the past, SP Dieharte is still, he's pretty much still Dieharte. He really hasn't changed that much at all. They basically upped his kill potential a little bit. They let him fit into boxes a little bit better by giving him some more utility skills by allowing him to buff one other female ally as an option. And now he has terrain master movements, but only on himself and not his troops. So you need to bring flyer troops or some kind of floating troops if you want to keep his terrain master. And that is pretty much it, believe it or not, in terms of what they did to Dieharte. Like I said, he is pretty much still the exact same unit. They just kind of fixed up these little things about him that people always found annoying. Although they didn't give him one of the most requested things people have for him, which is some kind of skill that allows him to attack alongside melee soldiers while piercing guard. They didn't add anything like that, unfortunately. Now, to be fair, fixing these things about Dieharte, I would say, I don't want to say completely fixes him, but it does make him a lot more usable. But unlike a lot of other SPs, it's not like we saw his usage spike up like crazy right after it came out. I mean, compared to his buddy Lewin, Dieharte definitely got the short end of the stick here. So basically, Dieharte's SP, I would say it's kind of like Ultimiller's SP in the sense that if you already had him at 6 stars, or if he's a unit you already were building anyway, he's definitely worth SPing if you want to use him again. His ability to assassinate and then stun another unit is still very, very powerful. Sometimes that can end the game just by itself. But I think for the most part, nobody is going to be going out of their way to build Dieharte just for his SP. At least not for the moment. And of course, he is an original light faction buffer, and I've mentioned this. I guess they're always kind of careful with how they buff the faction buffer characters. We do see that they added a handful of Origins characters from here on. Down the line we're going to get Azusa and Aurora, and they are Origins characters. So Dieharte can still get kind of indirectly buffed if they add more Origins characters. So yeah, I know I really didn't say much about SP Dieharte in this section because, like I said, he's pretty much exactly the same unit, except with some minor improvements. And, that doesn't necessarily make him bad because Dieharte already did have something of a niche. They fixed his biggest issue, which is not being able to move over terrain very easily. And because we got the fairies at the same time, he at least doesn't need to worry about getting rooted down onto the ground by his soldiers. Speaking of new soldiers, I guess we can talk about them. So this time they actually went ahead and added 4 troops at once. So I don't completely understand what they're going for here because some people expected them to add 4 troops last time, and then they added 2 instead. So everybody thought, oh, maybe they're just going back to just doing 2 troops at once instead of combining 2 patches, but they didn't do that. And this time they released 4 soldiers anyway. So okay, whatever. That's fine because so that means these are the last 4 soldiers we are getting, at least for the next couple months. So if you're like me and you've been saving up your materials for a while, you can feel completely safe in spending them now. You don't need to worry about, oh, do I still need to pinch some of my Anarchy materials and for some future soldiers? You don't need to, at least for several months. I wouldn't really be surprised if they didn't add any more soldiers for the rest of the year, but we'll see. So anyway, I think I was pretty thorough with them last time, but let's just go through them real quick here. So first we got... Zalon, why are you doing this? Okay, first we got giant spirit figurines. Okay, well, stupid translation aside, these are very, very good. I think I already explained why. The biggest abuser of these is, of course, Epsilon, and we are going to see these in action very soon this weekend during the top 16. Epsilon was already first pick material, and with these he's even crazier. His kill power goes up significantly just from the fact that demon units have that standard plus 40% stats. And of course on top the zombies just have really, really strong attack and crit rate increase. So Epsilon removes the biggest downside to them, which is the holy weakness. So So yeah, definitely look out for these. Most people playing PvP probably are working out Epsilon or have Epsilon already. But even if you don't, I think there are quite a few units that can use these quite effectively. Vargas does okay with them if you want to stab things. Yusuke, finally, he gets another troop that's very offensive. Shalinka, they're pretty good for Shalinka. Autokrato, I think they work okay for him. They can be okay for Albedo. Albedo will make them slightly tankier with her talent. But this is pretty much only if you want to do a bit of extra damage, which is not usually Albedo's role. These work well with Estelle because they are demon class, so they won't make her vulnerable to Twilight Star. And they actually do have terrain master movement. So Listel can maintain her floating movement, or terrain master movement at least. You can walk over mountains and stuff. But needless to say, for anybody except for Epsilon, you always have to be careful of the demon weakness to holy units. And, there's a fair amount of holy units. Lucretia is usually run as holy. Sherry is holy. A lot of the healers are holy, and sometimes they run fighting monks out front. Sometimes people run Light of Genesis as holy. Sometimes you'll run into Mariandel, who is holy. There is a fair amount of holy units in the meta, so you do need to be careful. But just like with werewolves, since there are soldiers, you can switch them out whenever you feel like you're going to have a bad matchup. But otherwise, they are a very good soldier. Golden Knights, I think, are pretty self-explanatory. If you run Cav Landius especially, I think these are very much worth building. If you run Elwyn, these are a good side option to have if you feel like you're running into magically resistant enemies. Leon and Werner Dean probably aren't going to use these just because they have Mechanical Knights, and those are usually way more useful. And Rosalia is likely not going to use these because she's unholy class, pretty much, I want to say 100% of the time. I don't think anybody runs Cav Rosalia. So yeah, even though Golden Knights are very good, they are quite limited because they are only especially good if you are running a Cav hero, which is mainly Cav Landius and Elwyn. And I guess if you run Scott, if you like using Scott in joint battles or something, he's pretty good. So yeah, the Golden Knights, they are good for what they are, but because of their limited distribution and their kind of limited usage, you might want to consider for a bit before you invest into them. Glacial Elemental, these are pretty good. They are a magic damage soldier. They have 2 range and they can ignore melee penalties while they are in water. So these are mainly made for Council of the Moon, who we aren't going to get until next month. But until then, they are still pretty good to train. If you want your juggler to be able to do some good offensive output without getting the downside of the holy weakness from werewolves, then you can try using these instead. Although wolves are typically more tanky and they restore life a lot more often, so there is a trade-off there. Aside from that, I think a lot of the units on this list also get pirates, like for example Elucia, Alfred, even Lester if you use Lester still, or Pierre. They all get pirates, and I think if you're between pirates or Glacial Elementals in terms of which ones you haven't raised yet, I would probably raise pirates first. Because personally I find pirates to be a lot more flexible. These are a lot more offensive, but if you just want a full offense, I guess it's between this and Lizardman. Lizardman is physical and this is magical. Anyway, like I said, this is mainly for Council of the Moon, so if you plan on pulling for him, maybe you can, just raise these ahead of time and then have them ready to go next month. Otherwise, like with a lot of aquatic soldiers they released, the main problem is that there actually aren't that many relevant aquatic units in the game to use them very often, and Council of the Moon, of course, is going to be the new shiny one. Nothing else to say. Now, fairies, these are definitely worth raising for a lot of units. If you are using Lana, if you are using Mu, if you are using Light of Genesis, Mariandel, or you plan on using SP Dieharte, or if you like using Hein without his SP class while in PvE, and way down the line if you want Kagura, every single one of them finds use with these fairies. Pretty much anybody that can use these can also use sorceresses for the most part, but in a one-to-one comparison, it's kind of a toss-up between the two. It really depends on what you're matching up against, but oftentimes people prefer fairies over sorceresses if you don't feel like you are able to survive hits anyway, because sorceresses can protect you against magic damage, but fairies are more consistent in their damage output because they don't require 100% life, and they do have a damage dealt increase as well as this reflect damage decrease, which is very nice to have sometimes. So yeah, unless you literally don't have any of these characters raised up or use any of these characters, then, you know, if you use even one of these, I would say these are a must raise. They're pretty much on par with Sorceress in terms of importance. So yeah, I think that's pretty self-explanatory. Okay, so exclusives, Kingdom of the Red Moon, Autokrato. Overall, I would say they are both worth getting. Kingdom of the Red Moon's exclusive is an all-around increase to pretty much his most important functions. Fixed damage dealt plus 20% is very significant. I mean, he's very focused on dealing fixed damage. And it also increases the command range of his Dark Side of the Moon. Before it was only 2 spaces, so now it's 3 spaces, which still isn't the largest possible, but still pretty good. Especially if you consider you're jumping into a team that might be in, for example, a plus sign. If someone's playing tank push and they're just huddling around your tank, there's not a central block you can teleport to. 3 blocks means you can cover their entire team, pretty much. So yeah, this is just an all-around increase to King of Red Moon's abilities, like I said. So there's really not a lot to say here. It's pretty much worth getting just because it's just an overall increase to him. Autokratos is a little bit harder to critique based on the fact that we are going to get a very powerful armor soon in the Tiamat's armor. But I would say the Autokrato one is still better because not only is stealing buffs very powerful, but Autokrato does this a little bit anyway. He has, for example, Usurp, which does steal buffs, and stealing even more buffs is obviously very useful. And this damage applies to his AoEs as well, so he can steal buffs from the entire enemy team. He doesn't need to rely on crit rolls like Himiko or something, and you can also combine this with Sword's Breath if you really want to, and kind of go nuts with the buff stealing. The only part of this I don't really like is the fact that it gives him more stats based off of how many enemies are taunted. So the reason I don't like this, and I kind of explained it in the last time I talked about it, maybe not clearly enough, but basically my problem with it is that Autokrato is sometimes used as a tanky slow unit. He has okay range thanks to his 3C, which is very long. It's a long line skill, but sometimes you do want to play slowly with him, and that means if you are not the one to engage, then you are getting nothing out of this before you are getting hit. Though, to be fair, if that is happening, that means your opponent is using some kind of fast-moving unit, which does trigger Autokrato's talent, which reduces damage taken anyway. So maybe that's just me being overly nitpicky about this aspect of the armor. I mean, getting up to 10% to all stats from your chest piece is nothing to shake a stick at. But like I mentioned, the Tiamat's armor is coming soon, and of course there's also things like the Forbidden Defender armor. In terms of general survivability, I would say those are still better than this. But it's pretty hard to pass up the crazy amount of buff steals that this can give you. So yeah, if you use Autokrato, I think this is worth getting. So for the Floating City, even though the patch notes only told us about the Salad Bar and the Automated Mines, which are going to be feeding into your Weapon Forge and your Salad Bar, it is worth noting that they, because as the soldiers indicated, they once again combined 2 patches, so we are actually getting the post office and the bathhouse as well. Now, you'll notice that once you go into the Floating City, you're going to start having these quests, or missions rather, where you have to click around the map and click on people with question marks over their head, and sometimes you have to go do basically a hide and seek game, and you have to go click on random stuff that appears on the map. The quests don't really get all that elaborate. There's a couple puzzle maps that they give you, but basically these are you get 2 of them daily, and you just clear them. They won't take that much time because the reward at the end is the bathhouse, which is worth getting. The bathhouse increases the max stamina on your account, which is very, very valuable. So I don't think, I think a lot of people will appreciate that. As for the soil and the automated mine, I think I've already expanded on them in the past, and I've already explained a great deal about them. I don't think it's necessary for me to go into a lengthy explanation for these anymore, and it's really not that complicated anyway. Create the fertile soil and the automated mines first. Queue the ore on the automated mines to create weapons, in addition to some of the Farmville resources, and then you can use the vegetables planted in the soil to get vegetables, which is used for a number of salads. I'll probably just put an image on screen to basically do a TLDR of how it works. Once again, I feel the need to point out that the Weapon Forge is a 20% SSR rate, approximately, and you get to choose the weapon type. So even though, some people argue like, oh, it doesn't have that much higher SSR rate than, say, farming a Dark Dragon, but I think what's worth remembering is that you get to choose the weapon type in this case. I think that helps narrow down the drop pool quite a bit. And honestly, at some point, you are going to run out of things to build for the floating city anyway, so these are the only things you're going to be able to spend your Farmville resources on, so, it's just an internal dump for your Farmville resources at some point, basically. It's free stuff. Everybody likes free stuff. What is not free are these new pieces of equipment that we are probably getting in the third week of this patch cycle. Now, I guess the quote-unquote good thing is that these are not going to come out before the end of playoffs, so these are not going to swing the matches in that way, and they probably would have, especially this new armor. We talked about it before, but Tiamat's armor here, it's basically a permanent Forbidden Defender armor activation as long as you're a mixed troop, which is really, really ridiculous. It's basically like an indirect nerf to Kyura and a bunch of the mages in the game. Some argue it was kind of justified because mages were getting kind of OP. I don't know how true that is. They are very strong though, and honestly, even with this armor, I would say Kyura and Lucretia are still very, very good units. Otherwise, the rest of this banner is mostly just stuff that's nice to have, but not necessarily OP. The hammer is very good. It disables last rites, it disables Forbidden Defender's armor and stuff. And the fact that this disables Forbidden Defender's armor just actually kind of indirectly makes Tiamat's armor even better, because if you have to deal with physical attackers that use the hammer and disable your armor anyway, you might as well go for the magical bulk that Tiamat's armor gives you. But the limitation on this hammer is the fact that it is a hammer. A lot of the relevant units don't use hammers, or they can't equip hammers rather. The infantries are the ones that equip hammers, and aquatics are the ones that equip hammers. So Consul of the Moon is going to be using it. Rosalia, if you use Rosalia, she is really good with it. Mariel can use this, but her exclusive is sometimes still better. Bernhard can maybe use this. It's hard to say if this would be better than a lot of his other choices. Yusuke can use this if you still use Yusuke, and Wataru is pretty relevant. Rio loves this, but Rio isn't that good to begin with as a unit, so it's more just like it's a nice. It throws him off a bone. It makes him so that he doesn't get sad every time Hilda activates an armor. This helm is kind of okay on a couple units, especially like Landius and maybe like Albedo, Leyden, etc. Like the counter tanks get some use out of this helm, but you don't really need to worry about it because once these go into the drop pool, you're going to see lots and lots and lots of these helms, so don't worry about it. Then the final one is this accessory, which is just a holy ring except physical. That is actually very useful in my opinion. Like, this is actually something I've wanted in as a choice for a while now. There are quite a few physical units that would really like to not get silenced, and they don't really want the drop in power that Bracer does. For example, I probably will throw this onto my Emperor Lovina if I can get one. Now obviously the trade-off when you're using this is that you don't get the bonus damage, or bonus attack rather, from a Slayer's Emblem or Judge Talisman and stuff, so it is something you need to consider. But silence ends games, so that is worth remembering. But if you rely on Judge Talisman to have Ares like one-shot stuff, then obviously like Judge Talisman is still going to be a lot better in a lot of cases. Overall, this is a pretty good equipment banner, but as always, equipment banners are kind of for whales, so pull at your own risk, guys. So before I finish up here, I guess I'll review real quick what we will probably be seeing this month. Last month we were sort of expecting regular Lodos War to rerun, but instead they made it rerun this month instead. Either way, it's a good opportunity to get Parn and Pyrrhus if you didn't already have them. And if you don't have Deedlit or Ashram, I would say for the most part Ashram I think is skippable. Deedlit is still quite good in a number of PvE fights, especially Jormungandr. You don't have to have her to be able to S-rank that fight, so I wouldn't worry too much about it. But I do think it's worth noting that they are limited time collab units, so if you really want them, then that's always a pressure of not really knowing if they're ever going to get rerun, so you're going to have to make that decision for yourself. Like I said, neither one of them is particularly relevant in PvP anymore. Deedlit can still be okay, but Christianity gives her kind of a hard time. and she often will kill herself trying to attack into Hilda as well. She'll get reflected to death. She is still okay in rush battles because she can move quite far using the danger zone and her Actigan. But for the most part, Dieharte is mostly confined to playing in PvE nowadays, and Ashram is just not that great in general anymore. We should be getting a rerun of the roguelike mode, so I know a lot of people enjoy that mode, so that'll be fun. So some of the banners we are going to get include Rosenseal and Transcendent as a standard banner. This one is worth noting just because Rosen is very important for newer players, so if you don't have Rosen yet, you might want to consider pulling on this one. It kind of sucks that she's paired with Transcendent, because Transcendent is kind of a niche character, and new players really do not need him. Aside from that, there really isn't anything too important. There is a Licorice Mario Tsubame Destiny banner, which is a completely new Destiny banner, but I don't think that's super important. Unless you just needed to fill out your barracks with a particular character, or you really wanted one of them. Whatever the case, that is all I have for you guys today. Like I said, I've already recorded audio where I talk about the Valkyria Chronicles collab, and hopefully I can get that video out soon. But until then, thanks for watching, everyone, as always. But I know I say this a lot, but hopefully I can find a lot more free time so I can make more videos, because I do enjoy making these videos, but sometimes it's hard to find the time. Anyway, I'll see you guys in the next one.